Welcome, everybody, to another episode of our podcast. We're calling these few segments that I'll be having on these podcasts Leading with Wisdom. And our first guest on this lineup is Chris Pearse, who is a leadership development consultant and a specialist working with leaders at all levels. And I'm very excited to have him here. We've met briefly before. He's seen some of my posts, I've seen some of his work. We really resonate very deeply on so many different levels. And I think the world needs more of this type of leadership that Chris sort of represents. And we're going to unpack that in a conversation where both of us are going to share our views. And you, as a leader or as a coach, can benefit from that discussion and take your own learnings out of that as well. So, Chris, first of all, welcome.
Thank you, Rishad. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you again.
Yeah. And so you're based in which part of the UK?
Edinburgh, up in
Lovely.
Scotland.
So that's
Yep.
Scotland. Okay. So,
And we've got a couple of inches of snow out there as we speak.
and I'm in Cape Town, and we've got 37 degrees Celsius heat
Lovely.
wave.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I love the heat. I just can't stand too much of the. I like the snow, but I don't like that middle way, like London kind of weather. It's that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What's the word for it? It's not soggy, but it's wet. It's wet and it's cold.
Well, the Scots do have a word for it, where this kind of cold, grey, misty, damp, depressing weather, they call it dreich.
Dreich. Okay, is that from
Dreich.
Gaelic? Is that from the Gaelic?
I would think so. I'm no language expert, but I would
It
imagine.
doesn't sound like native English. That's
Oh,
why
no.
I'm asking. Yeah. So Chris, what brings you to the leadership world?
Well, I suppose it all started when I started looking at engineering as a career. I was always interested in taking things apart and putting them back together again. Even as an 8-year-old, it started pretty early. And I loved mechanisms. I actually fell in love with chemistry at one point, but I blew myself up in my home laboratory. Had to change direction after that. So I did electronics, and I loved engineering, and I got into research and development, and I was designing some very interesting stuff for controlling various processes. I got promoted into management, sales management, general management. And I suppose there was an unwritten assumption that people were going to behave just like mechanisms and structures behave, or like chemical formulae behave. It's predictable.
Your assumption, or was it?
No, I mean, it certainly wasn't drummed into me. It was just something I must have picked up on that was never challenged.
Right.
And it dawned on me, I suppose, late 20s, early 30s. It dawned on me that people actually didn't conform to those laws of science and engineering at all. There was this kind of unpredictability, chaotic and emotional nature to people that just did not fit into my model of how the world worked or works. So I had to find another way of dealing with it, because I have people to manage and to lead and to point in the right direction, all of that. And I suppose concurrently, there was another influence, and that was a kind of philosophical interest that I always had ever since I was a teenager, into the nature of the world and what's going on behind the kind of facade that we take as reality. What's managing that? What's the intelligence behind it? Because it always struck me there was an intelligence there. And I think those two influences came together in my 30s, and I started to understand a little bit more about human nature and how to deal with it, and the fact that you could not treat it like a mechanism. You had to find a different approach. And my career developed, and I got into more senior positions. And then when I was about 40, I found myself spending more time in airports than at home. Pretty typical experience, I suspect, for a lot of people. But I had it was, I can't claim it was foresight and courage. It was just that I found the work a bit soul destroying. I found that situation to be unpalatable. And the only alternative was to leave and do my own thing, which I did. And I started off as a business consultant, advising people how to structure their businesses and how to lead them. But I realized that, particularly with small businesses, they are reflections of the people that run them. You know, they're a mirror for the people that own them, run them, manage them, whatever they are. And that if you want to make an impact on a business, your best bet is to work on the individuals that are leading it rather than the business itself. That's where the levers of change are. And eventually, and quite gradually, I evolved into, well, initially a facilitator working with teams, and then into a coach working with individuals, and then ultimately into someone that creates leadership development programs. So I started writing programs incorporating material that I was I can't say it's my material. I write it, but it's a kind of distillation of all the learnings and teachings, both very practical leadership stuff and more esoteric metaphysical stuff. All of this into material supported by some very well-known commentators that, you know, are well-known, people like Sadhguru, for instance, and Eckhart Tolle and many others. And that material supports the coaching that I do with these individuals. And I find that combination of material content plus the kind of live coaching interaction is very powerful and works very well. So that's in a nutshell the journey from a curious 8-year-old up to where I am now.
Well, it sounds very similar to my journey in so many ways, listening to you. I also was very curious in the beginning, and then, did the same thing, went into, got sick of it and got tired of the soulless nature of the corporate world in many ways. And maybe you didn't say those words, but there wasn't that much substance and that much meaning. It quickly became mundane and dry. And I think if I could guess, what your feeling was and my feeling is what you're ultimately doing right now, and what I'm ultimately doing right now is there must be more to this, right? It's the question that I always say, what is the question that comes to me? There must be more to this, more to the job, more to the career. And like you said, there must be a higher form of intelligence. There must be. And so it's these questions that make me feel alive. And if I'm not asking them, and I'm making a lot of money and I'm totally busy from morning till night, because the busyness trap is the time that we live in right now, and people really love being busy. You know, it's one of those things. I saw this post and this guy said, how are you doing? He said, oh, I'm from morning till night, 16 hours a day, just packed meetings after the other. And the person responds and says, well done, keep going.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that kind of psychology or the psychosis of the modern era, which is don't reflect, don't have time to think, just push. Does that resonate with your sort of higher? Because then you mentioned about the esoteric side, which I'd like to talk about, because in the traditional leadership world, this is a big no-no, even though that perception is changing very rapidly. But why do you think that the esoteric or the spiritual, any word that you use is so damn loaded, you can't use the right word, but something more? How would you define that, and why is that important?
Well, first of all, I virtually never use the word spiritual for the reasons you've outlined. I think the closest word to it is probably essential or existential. But it comes back to your mention of the word intelligence. I less and less can I look at the world around me without seeing is the wrong word, but perceiving an implicit intelligence that brings order to things. I just can't see the world without it. Now, even so, I would still classify myself as an agnostic, because, and I'll go down a bit of a cul-de-sac here if you'll bear with me.
Yeah, sure.
But belief is a part of the problem that we experience as human beings, and the world tends to divide into the believers and the non-believers, the religious, those that are religious and God-fearing, and those that are atheist and don't believe. In my view, they are both in the same camp, because they are they're really guided by an inner belief that the world is like this or like that. The fact that one believes in God and the other doesn't makes no difference. There is still a very strong belief system impacting their view of the world. Whereas with the agnostic, they say, I don't know. Because actually they don't, unless you have clear proof of some superior being. There is no knowledge of it. And the agnostic is open to all possibilities. So the agnostic is constantly seeing and noticing, because they are aware of this gap in their knowledge. So in spite of the fact that I see an intelligence all around me, I don't label that as even God-like, let alone God itself. I don't know what God is. So I'm an agnostic that cannot look at the world without seeing an innate, implicit, distributed intelligence in everything I perceive, including myself, of course. So if you look inwards, you see it. Now, many of the great teachings will tell us rather glibly that we are that intelligence. That is us. That is our true nature. And occasionally I get a glimpse of that reality, a glimpse. But I can't, unfortunately, I can't say that I'm connected to it on a persistent basis. But certainly there are glimpses there, and each glimpse is a reminder to keep that awareness open, keep that perception open, to perceive more of it.
Would you say that the more you age, the more glimpses you get?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say the more, contrary to what I was expecting and contrary to popular opinion, the older I get, the less I know, the more curious I am, and the more childlike I feel.
Yeah, it's you resonate. I resonate very much with that as well. I was reflecting on the irony of that when we're young, we are full of excitement and adventure and self-belief, and as we age, there is a sense of great despondency. Even though I was just reflecting on that, if I did something 1,000 times effectively and accurately, you think after that 1,000th time, I would be so certain of my ability to do that. For instance, your health, your job, you making it in the world, you being without money, you going through difficulties. You would think that because you've encountered these challenges so many times, that by now, whenever that now is for you, you'd say, well, based on past experience, I got this. Yet, what I find is disproportionate level of mistrust. As we age, we become more fearful, more doubtful, and more afraid. And then you see people, for instance, online who have got no leadership experience or life knowledge, and they're on there going, I got the formula. This is what you need to do. And it's on TikTok, and everybody's listening to this guy or this woman, and you're thinking, okay. And then, of course, it doesn't mean that they know less than us, or that's not the reflection. However, it does make you wonder in sort of contrast to this knowledge, which I like to use the word the ineffable in my book that I wrote. It's called Mu. Dogen, the great Zen master who brought Zen to Chan from China to Japan, he uses the word the ineffable, and I like it because there's no way you can affix any label on it. So you get glimpses of this. It's weird because as you make your journey back, I truly believe there is this return journey, whether it's to Earth or to God or to heaven or whatever floats your boat in that sense, right? I'm not too tied up on it, but you start getting glimpses into that place that you're going to, and I reflected on that as a child when it comes into the world. When you look at a child, is how I finished the book off. So I'm going to give you a spoiler here. In the book that I wrote, me glimpsing into the unknown, the unfathomable, this not to find God, to find myself in the whole thing, is that when you look at a child, the only thing you get is that sense of deep otherworldly like nature, and it's a sweet feeling. As when we get these feelings and these glimpses into the ineffable, which occurs inside of us rather than out there, you get that same sweet feeling, and to me reveals the nature of life with that same essence. And I link it to the heart in the book, which I try to bridge the gap between Zen and then Sufism in that particular way of taking it from the ineffable to the heart without a word in either case. There's no word, but it leads to that sense of hope, of fullness, of love as the big word that stands out, but not the human love.
Yes.
And to me, what are your thoughts on it? It leaves me the sense of awe, I suppose.
Yes, or I mean, love's a very interesting thing, and I think it's significant that we only really have one word for it in English, whereas you go to Sanskrit, you find many more, and as some of the commentators say, English is a brilliant language at describing the outer world.
Yeah.
But if you want to describe the inner world, you need something that's designed for it, like
100%.
Sanskrit.
100%. Yeah. The same with Arabic and Farsi, I might add.
Is it?
Farsi is all the poetry on love comes from Farsi. When you read most of them, you read about how they describe this love and linked into this cosmic type of love. Farsi is incredible. I mean, Rumi is wrote in Farsi as an example.
Yes.
Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the love is very often considered to be a verb by English speakers.
Yeah.
I don't think it is. I mean, I know what it's like to fall in love and to fall out of love, and to be loving and all of that. But the kind of love we're talking about is something I think very, very different. And it's felt. You don't do it. In fact, ultimately, you become it.
There we go.
And
same as the word the ineffable or God or all those things.
Yes.
It's exactly the same. Yeah,
absolutely. And perhaps the closest in concept, if that's the right word, to love is another word which is very often misused, and that's consciousness.
Yeah, it's used a lot.
Yeah, and I think that the realization I had with that word was that, again, we are not conscious in the sense that consciousness is an emergent property of the human brain. Awareness is, but that's something slightly different. So you can be aware of something, unaware. You can be asleep or awake. But consciousness is a state. It's a that one can enter into, one can connect with. And again, the words are inadequate here, but it is all present. It's omniscient. It's omnipresent. It's and again, some of these teachings that we're talking about tell us that the entire universe is created out of consciousness. Now, that is a concept which is far too big for the human intellect to grasp. And that can only be, I imagine, because the human intellect is a product of the creation and of consciousness. It is not, and therefore it's a bit like trying to bite your own teeth. You know, you cannot grasp.
Was Alan Watts' famous line? He said that.
Alan, I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. I could listen to him all day long. So yes, I think love, it's becoming more and more evident to me that, and what's really interesting, I find, is that I've been experimenting for the past year or so with the idea of, and actually it's not an idea, let's be accurate about this, but with the practice of being that love. So I more and more regularly, I am reminded of my state by a particular feeling. So somebody might say something that irritates me. Immediately, that's a signal to me that I'm not completely aligned with myself. And it's a nudge to get back into alignment by being the love that I am. Now, that's a really interesting exercise. And I really commend this to your listeners. And I'm sure this is something you've practiced in the past. But when you decide to become what you want to be, and you bypass the intellectual process of trying to become it, then some amazing things can happen. Because the reality is, in fact, Shakespeare talks about this. He says, if you don't have a particular virtue, just adopt it. He uses Shakespearean language. If thou hast not a virtue, whatever it is. And this is eminently possible. Now, our intellects will tell us it's not possible, that you have to do work and become it. But that's not the case. You can, just through a decision, and in a decision, you can become anything you want to be. And a good place to start is with love, with being being the love that you would want in your world. Does that make sense?
Of course.
Yeah.
This is discussions that I have all the time, and it's discussions that I love very much to have, and I totally get it. So what I'm going to do is just change gears a little bit, even though this topic is of fascinating interest, and I talk about it for hours on many other podcasts as well. So it's a topic of interest, definitely, and it's my main work in many ways. And so my question is, or my thought process around this is, well, one of the things that I was sort of pondering in knowing about the sorry, my cat's going a bit crazy at the back. Knowing about this other dimension, or the further reflections, or the deeper ponderings of life, which all poets and all artists, I just wrote an article about AI and artists reflecting on Henri Matisse and his works and his paintings, how he was seeking to, sort of develop a unique expression, unique in the sense of his unique expression rather than unique out there amongst all these people out there. And I truly believe that each one of us, there's that word belief again, but I'll allow myself to use it this time, are there to have this unique creative expression of life, or however that may be. I find, and you may find this too, that in a lot of the leadership circles that we work in, there is a great interest in what we're saying when we get to the right people. So
yes.
When I'm talking to a leader and I'm talking to a person one-on-one, it doesn't matter if they're the president and members of parliament that are clients of mine, the high-level business officials, and very rational thinkers, writers and journalists and things like that. And they love this topic. But when you write about this topic and you approach a company on this level, saying you need to get to know yourself deeper, and it's really important for you to develop a deeper sense of awareness with yourself. which me and you have gone on that journey and reaped tremendous rewards. And now we want to offer it to the world because we're saying this is it. And it's not us saying it, is what all the great people across all, even when we talk into the scientific realm with Einstein and Tesla and
Yeah.
all these people, there was always that connected to the higher essence. But there's such a polarity out there that you've almost got to put on a stage and say, hi, we'll make you rich, we'll make you famous, we'll make you productive, but we can't tell you how, because if we tell you how, you're going to go with this other guy who's going to bullshit you saying you should implement 1,000 different steps, right? The 7 steps to leadership principles, this cut and paste bullshit, right? And it frustrates me.
Yeah. Well, it's because you're dealing with an addiction.
Uh-huh.
We're dealing with addicts in some respects. Yeah. And I'm no expert on the kind of addiction we normally think about, but I've heard it said many times that in some cases the addict has to hit rock bottom. In some cases, they have to hit such a state that they find it intolerable to go on any longer. And I think that's the case with some business people. Certainly some of them that I've worked with. They've hit a place where they just can't go on any longer. They know they have to take a different direction in life. And and these are people at the end of their tether who are, some of them, fortunately very few, but nevertheless some of them who are considering the ultimate exit.
And it's rising, especially amongst the males that I've spoken to as well. It's a rising issue. But sorry to change direction there, but I'm more referring to how business people that employ consultants, coaches, trainers approach the market in that way.
Oh, yeah.
It's more from that level. I know those people on the other side are, in fact, I would proudly say they're desperately in need of listening to this and working on this level, because I've seen it. And I'm not saying there's no other way, but this is the direct way, through direct confrontation and encounter of yourself, and then asking those deeper questions, which I believe we're genetically wired to ask these questions. But you see this facade, and my whole thing is, how do we break this down for them? And that's been my work. If you see online, even though I'm talking through leadership and all the rest of it, I'm using as much conceptual frameworks as possible to hint at, guys, look a little deeper. But I'm really trying to hold their hands, and it's really frustrating me in many ways to slowly guide them and say, guys, really, yeah, I'm talking your language, but we gotta. And I believe right now, with the age of AI and with the amount of over dominant, overthinking, over rationalization of life, we're going to collapse as a society. And I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but they need to start listening, like, seriously.
Yes. Well, several things come to mind as you were speaking, Rishad. The first one is, and this might sound a bit grating, a bit harsh, but I certainly see the truth in it. That is that you and I are not here to fix a broken world. And I think that's really important, because there are a lot of some of the people you're talking about believe that they are here to fix a broken world, because we see this kind of behavior not just in the commercial sector, but in the charitable and non-profit sectors as well.
Yes, that's right.
Where people are desperate to change other people in order to make their lives more tolerable for them. Now, my view is that I am not responsible for your life's journey. Having said that, I shouldn't be interfering with it at any level. I shouldn't be making it worse for you, obviously. But I've struggled with exactly what you're talking about in the past, and I've come to the conclusion that if I say that I am not responsible for fixing you, but I am here if you need a different perspective, then that changes the dynamics greatly, and it shifts from selling stuff, convincing people, to making an offer and making yourself available. And that's got a completely different energy to it. And it's the difference between leaning in and standing straight. You know, we often hear this term leaning in. You've got to lean into this, you've got to lean into that. No, you don't. You don't have to lean into anything at all. But you do have to stand up. You do have to make yourself known, you know. So it's not an excuse for hiding your light under a bushel, but it is about finding the right balance in your marketing approach so that people know you're there, they know what you're about, they know what you're offering, but they come to you and they say, you know, I like what you say, can you tell me more? And I'm sure you've had lots of instances where your book or a talk has led to people approaching you.
Yeah,
and that's very powerful.
Yeah, I find a bit of both to be true in what you're saying in my practical experience. On the one level, you have to tell them why they need to use you. And on the other level, you can't go and insist that you're here to save the world, because also it is a limited perception that the world is broken, and maybe the world is not, and maybe it's your perception. And then you go around changing things that are not broken, right? And like you mentioned about the NPOs and this other charitable type of people as well. And we need to save these people, and in the process, maybe destroying something else. And I think that's the holistic wisdom angle that I talk about. But having said that, I do find a joint approach, one of this is what I do, and if you need it, and I do need to speak in their language. And if you look at any, I wouldn't say spiritual person, but anyone who believed they had a message to give, you do need to speak it into the language of the people. The challenge is the language of the people right now is a language of entire disillusionment, delusionment. They're entirely deluded because they think that they've understood life and they're living in a sort of reality and devoid of the broader picture. If you look at just leaders as well, in the actions that they take and the outcomes that they make, you know, when I coach leaders, I sometimes get a bit embarrassed, because when I'm talking to the person and I'm like, you're leading 65,000 people, right? As an example, or looking at some people on these podcasts, and you're like, wow, you know, that's really sad. And I find that people that on the ground, me and you, a couple of entrepreneurs that I know, you know, guys on their own that I've had conversations with, and they're so much more insightful. They're so much more deeply aware of things. And I'm not saying they all like that, but yeah, I think a bit of both is necessary. Is that like practicing love, like you said, and love wants to share and love wants to give, but love is not needy as well. So it's that definition of your description of love, in fact, because ultimately it's everything. Your universe is what you create around it and what terms you give and the meaning and significance you give to particular terms. So I think a bit of this and a bit of that, but like you said before we came on the call, is that I keep on doing what I'm doing and leaving out the noise. And I think that's I do it in my authentic way, and sometimes it comes across like you know, I'm stating a position, and I do. A lot of people feel, well, I can't go and say I'm you know, a top leadership coach, because what am I comparing it to? So you know, if I've got 20 high profile clients, does that make me a top leadership coach? Now, when you think of yourself next to, say, someone like Marshall Goldsmith, who is the name in coaching, then I'm not the top leadership coach, and then you start facing this imposter syndrome, and then you make yourself feel really small. So what I do instead is I say I am a top leadership coach. I wear that hat proudly because it's all very subjective. And I go out there and I make my claims, and people respond to those claims. And I know at some level I'm saying, do you really need to go and sell yourself like that? Yes, unfortunately I do, and I got no problem with it. If you got a problem with it, that's your problem. You know, there's someone else on the other side.
Yeah, well, no, I don't see any issue with presenting yourself as the authority that you aspire to, that you are. Absolutely no problem with that at all. I think it's what I'm probably thinking of, and I have to mention LinkedIn in this, because LinkedIn is probably my biggest window into the world of that we're in, of people that I don't necessarily know. Okay, I don't pick up the phone and talk to. And what I notice about LinkedIn is quite a lot of what I can only call desperation. People who are desperate to make themselves heard, to say, I'm here, it's me, look, you need me, and that's the kind of slightly sordid, even sordid approach to sales, which is everything I don't want to be. And I think it's that kind of desperation that I'm wanting to avoid. I mean, that's not something you or I do, but I do agree. You've got to be known. You've got to make yourself known. You've got to have a profile. People have to know you're there, and they've got to know what you're about. And they've got to know what you're saying and what you're offering. Absolutely. But there comes a point where that can roll over into a kind of desperate attempt to sell yourself to people. And that's something I don't want to get involved in, and something I see a lot of.
So Chris, we originally met, and I told you how I read an article that you wrote on Forbes, which I really enjoyed. Now I can't remember what the topic of the article was, which is quite funny.
Oh,
but
was
I
it?
read it and went.
Was it? Hang on. Was it 10 reasons to avoid executive coaches like the plague?
No, it wasn't that one.
It wasn't that
sounds
one.
Interesting. That's I didn't know you wrote such an article. Okay, that's a good one. Okay. That's a nice
that's
one.
on Forbes. That's on Forbes as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to check that out. No, it wasn't that. It was something that sort of resonated deeply with me. I think it may have been esoteric in nature. Something you were writing. I don't know. I think it was on Forbes. Yeah, it was on Forbes. But there was an article that you wrote, and yeah, you write often on Forbes.
Well, I've got 23 articles on Forbes, so
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I can't tell you which one it is.
Yeah, it was one, and I said, "Wow, I like where this guy's coming from." So definitely, and now it confirms listening to you. I can see that I was right about what I said, sensed about you. So did you write a book as well, or what? What
Yes,
is this?
I did write a book.
The Broken CEO.
The book is called The Broken CEO, and the subtitle is How to Be the Leader You Always Wanted to Be.
Okay. You've got a lot of followers on Instagram.
I don't think on Instagram.
Oh, there must be a difference. There's another where it says, "I'm Chris Pearse." No, that's not you.
No, that's not me.
It looks like a cowboy. That's interesting. So tell me about the book that you wrote.
Right. Well, the book is it's a kind of distillation of everything I've picked up in my own leadership experience and that of coaching leaders as well. And it comes in 4 sections. There are 4 basic bits to it. The first describes the parlous nature and experience of some leaders, and why and how things go wrong for them. And I think there's a list of about 7 or 8 different leadership archetypes, including the miserable millionaire and the people pleaser, and stereotypes like that, which I examine, and that kind of sets the scene for people's experience of leadership, or how it can turn into that. Because of course nobody goes into running a company thinking it's going to be miserable. Nobody does that, but they can very easily, a couple of years in, end up in that experience. So that's the kind of hook. And then there are 3 other sections, which the first section talks about personal development, the next one about relationship development, and the third one about leadership development. But it all hinges on the personal development and the need to understand some basics about human nature, which are generally not very well known. So stuff like, a good example is that most male people, male leaders, particularly alpha males, would suggest that they make their decisions based on logic and reason. And it's very difficult to persuade them otherwise. They are rational, logical thinkers. But the fact of the matter is, and it's been shown beyond any doubt through neuroscience and meta studies, that nobody on the planet makes decisions based on reason.
That's what it was. That was the article. You were talking about
the article.
This.
There you go. There you go.
You were talking about that precisely.
Yeah. Well, it's quite an eye-opener to some people, because they honestly believe they make logical decisions, and they don't. Nobody does. We all base decisions on how we feel. And then what very often happens is that you make a decision based on that, and then you think, right, how am I going to justify this in rational terms? Mm-hmm. So you then work backwards, come up with a deep argument that you can present to other people as to why you made this decision. Now, back in the 80s, somebody did a meta study on brain traumas.
On brain what?
Traumas.
Traumas, right? Yeah.
Where individuals had been involved in a car accident, or they'd had a tumor removed from their brains, which involved incapacitating or debilitating their ability to feel in the way that you and I are familiar with.
Yeah.
And what they discovered was that these people stopped being able to make decisions. They could still, one was a lawyer, and he could still present all the arguments, all the legal arguments for different scenarios. But he was completely incapable of prioritizing them or suggesting the one to go with.
Wow.
One of them, in fact, more than one, was rendered incapable of deciding which restaurant to go to on a Saturday night. And in fact, there's a little conversation between his neurosurgeon, which says, where are you going to eat tonight? And he spends half an hour describing the pros and cons of all the different restaurants in the area that he knows of, but he can't make a decision. He cannot say, right, we're going to go to this one. He's incapable of it, because he's no longer got the capacity to feel in the way that we do.
That's mind-blowing, Chris. That's just, I need to pause there for a second. That's like, I didn't know there was this study done. That's mind-blowing, because it just proves that exactly by neuroscience. I'm just blown away about the study.
But isn't that certainly my experience?
Of course.
And I'm sure it's your experience.
I didn't know about this experiment, but over and over again, I know at the end, and I spoke to a guy, sorry to cut you off, I spoke to a guy who's a PhD in microbiology, and he studied the nature of logic and understanding and questioning and deduction, because that all he does all day is examine lab results and statistics and makes a decision. And I said to him, can you say at the end of the day that your decision was based absolutely on a rational choice? And he says, we make as much of a guess as we can, and then we guess. It's a very calculated guess, and that's what you're talking about. You follow your heart, or you follow your feelings at the end of the day.
You do. It's very important to say that does not absolve you from the need to do your rational homework. You need to do the analysis. You need to do all of that. But all that does is change the way you feel about the issue. And it's the feeling that will steer you in one direction or the other.
So tell me a bit more about the study.
The study was done by a bloke called Antonio Damasio. Yeah. And he's got YouTube videos
out of that. So this person wasn't able to make a decision because he had all the rational facts, but he didn't have the emotional component activated in his brain. And so what else did you discover from that? What are some of the other takeaways from that?
Well, I think an interesting one is, if you kind of pan out from that, is that the human intellect is actually quite a limited aspect of what it is to be a human being. And interestingly, if you go to the yogic or the Vedic traditions, The brain is just another organ in the body, and it's no different from your liver or your heart. It just performs a function, which is to think. But thinking is a very limited activity, in the sense that it is it's, well, first of all, thinking tends to be limited. I think tends or is always limited to operate. Well, the intellect operates on data stored in memory. Okay, therefore, it is always historic. You can only think either historically or think imaginatively about the future, but you cannot think about the present without, no, you cannot think about the present, because as soon as you've thought about it, it's past. You can perceive the present, you can live in the present, but as soon as you engage the thinking faculty, you're dealing with historic data. And again, coming back to the yogic perspective on things, the human mind comprises 4 elements, essentially. You've got identity, and that is related to, but not the same as ego. Identity, you've got memory, you've got intellect. But then beyond that, you've got this thing called intelligence. Now, intelligence is operating on us all the time, in every single cell. All our cells are operating intelligently. And I have to give credit to Sadhguru for this. When he says that one aspect of the body's intelligence is that when you eat a banana, the banana becomes a part of you. You don't become a banana. And that's all down to the inherent intelligence, massive intelligence in your digestive system. The human intellect cannot get near to getting its head around what's going on there. Mm-hmm. And in fact, thank goodness, we cannot intervene in that process.
Yeah, we'll destroy the whole thing if we
could. Thank God we can't do that. Thank God our intellects cannot take control even of our heart or our liver, because we wouldn't last 2 seconds.
Yeah, and what I want to do is just clarify what that means for us as leaders as well. But just to add on to that, I did a video on the cell's innate intelligence, which is a little 4-minute clip, and I'll put a link in it as well, which talks about this particular thing. But going back to what we know about when we talk about this limited, again, I explored these words in a lot of detail, and I find it very difficult to use the word as we know, without a lot of reservation. For instance, intelligence, yes. For instance, as well, because again, what you mentioned about the Vedas in the Vedic text, talking about the brain being another organ, they also said that thought is simply another sense, along with smell and along with sound. So it puts it in a category. But what we've done is we've elevated thought to the level of definition of who we are and what we are and how we function and how the universe functions. I think, therefore I am, as the famous thing was said.
Wrong way round.
Right, exactly. So just to get that into perspective, for me, it's very important that people understand that we're not saying that thought is irrelevant. We're not saying that decision making and rational thinking has no usage, but especially coming with the age of AI, we have to know where to place that in the orders of importance as to what defines us as human. And that's why the article I just wrote this morning about art and about AI and our need for human expression. And this wonderful mathematician who's a PhD in mathematics, but he really astounded me with his statement. And he was saying how anything that was innovative, life-changing, game-changing, planet-changing did not arise from rational thinking alone. So it's a combination of using thoughts with feelings, with intuition. And I go back to this thing over and over again, that we have to go beyond thought, but include thought in our structure of our mind. So what I do is I tell clients, I'm going to use thought, my words, to take you through your thinking to get you past the thinking.
Yes. Yes.
So we're not, because there's no other way for us to engage as humanity, and then say, well, what else is there? Because the famous Zen koan says, what was your name before you were born?
Yeah.
Right, and that puts you in a bit of a pickle, right? Because you didn't have a name. So the Zen koan's a lovely way of getting you out of your mind and into confusion, which then takes you looking elsewhere, because you're fumbling in the dark, going, the sound of one hand clapping. Where, how does one hand clap? And that's a great way of getting past that. And it's a very powerful tool for creativity, for decision making, for productivity. And that's the thing I just want to remind listeners of and leaders of. You will become more useful and more effective rather than less, and become all spiritual, or whatever the term is that's been polarized in this time. You'll actually be able to be extremely accurate in your decision making and your ability to lead. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you bring up a very, very good point here, because I think a lot of people they erroneously discriminate between I'll use the S word, the spiritual, the esoteric, the elevated, and the down to earth practical, right? They discriminate between the two and see them as separate worlds. The reality is they're not. And the job of you and me is to integrate them.
Right.
And there's I'm sure you're familiar with the deck of tarot cards, and there's I think it's the number 1, not number 0, because that's the fool, but number 1 is the magician, and the magician is in a pose. He's looking like this. He's got one hand pointing up to the heavens, and the other one pointing to earth, and he's got a table in front of him with a set of tools. So all this is telling us that he's got very, very high ideas, but he's got his feet firmly on the ground. He's a practical bloke. He's making this stuff real and actionable, and that's critical. And I think, are you an engineer by training, Rishad?
No, not by. You're a computer engineer, you could say, but
well, that'll do. That'll do.
That'll do. Yeah. I have the same brain as you do, that highly inquisitive, taking it apart kind of brain. So I can totally relate to that.
But I think being an engineer helps that, because I cannot move away from the need to impact the world around us and impact our experience of the world, and there is a tendency and a temptation for some people on this kind of path to try to leave the practical, physical world behind them, and that that's fine for some people, but it's not for the likes of you and me, and certainly not for our clientele. What we bring to them has to be practical, and the fascinating thing is it's far more practical than the received wisdom, because the received wisdom neglects and ignores the reality behind the appearance of things.
Yeah. When you say received wisdom, what do you mean?
Well, what we're told, what society tells us, what the business schools tell us.
Right, which has a place in the whole scheme of things as well. So of course, it's not the primary.
It's a part of the picture. It's not the full picture.
Well, it's like what my friend, who's this incredible homeopath, told me. He said, "Yes, I did. You do need to go to medical school and get it, but that's your beginning point. Now you go and explore by yourself and say, okay, well, I know where these organs are and I know all the different functions of the body." But now I need to go learn this all again. And I think a lot of people, especially from the academic world, think they've got a PhD in leadership. You should see the ridiculous things they've got PhDs in. I mean, it's insane. You can get a PhD in Zen Buddhism, a PhD in spirituality. Come on, what? And the other person I'm going to be interviewing as well, I had this conversation because he's highly specialized. And I said to him, "Don't you see a problem with it?" And he said, "I do." So we're going to have this really good discussion. I'm going to challenge him because I think in this world of hyper specialization, we're missing the mark in the holistic, and that's been my whole focus on holistic wisdom, is incorporating a holistic understanding and a robust understanding in what it means to be an effective leader. And just echoing back your thoughts, it is about being in the world, but being so grounded in many ways. And that's what I take so much teachings from the learnings from the samurai, which I talk a lot about in the course that I put together as well. With the samurai being a representative of, I mean, they learned how to be fearless and how to lead with tremendous courage from the Zen masters, who basically are saying that you're not even alive. There is no life in that particular way, yet you've got to take care of these things. And so they lived in a, one of the most things that struck me so beautifully is that when the samurai woke up in the morning, there would be forecasting their death by the evening. So they would start in the morning and say, right, I need to go pay this guy, I need to do this, and as soon as I'm done, I need to hit the pub, whatever it is that they need to do, go have myself some sake, dance with some dancing girls, or whatever those kind of things that they did, and just breathe in the air, look at another forest, smile and laugh for a day, because tomorrow they're not going to be here. And whatever appeals to your moral compass is up to you. But other than that, I actually love that embracing of the day. Yet it wasn't, remember that the samurai was so grounded in loyalty to their leaders that it was never entertainment as we find today, especially in the modern culture, at the expense of others or as an individual. It was never entertainment or love or togetherness at the expense of others. It was always this camaraderie and togetherness as well.
Yeah.
So a lot to learn from. There's so much wisdom out there, and my brain has been. I have an interesting reflection that this engineering brain that me and you both have. I could take the most complex concepts and I can break it down, and in fact, it's what keeps me alive. I'll go research, quantum physics and some very heavy complexity algorithms or mathematical formulas, and I'll dive into it, and I'll get to the end of it, and I'll be like, wow, I did that. It's like me solving a crossword puzzle, as you see some people who get older do. And then I applied this thing about nature of reality and what's life about and who am I? And these questions just like hitting the brick wall every time, because the only way to encounter and answer these questions is from direct experience. And the problem is I was using my rational mind to try to answer them.
Yes.
And you get
we have to be able to bypass the thinking that holds us back. And I get rather cheesed off with all the stuff that's written about mindset and how we have to take a limited mindset and turn it into a growth mindset. And I did a workshop on this early in the year to a corporate client. And my point was, that's fine. Yeah, by all means, turn your limited mindset into a growth mindset. But for God's sake, don't stop there. Move on and start to see what life looks like beyond mindset. Because a mindset is implicitly an unhealthy mind. Minds are meant to be neuroplastic. Even neuroscientists tell us that. It's neuroplastic. It is not mindset. Yeah, a mindset is a diseased mind. It's unhealthy. So let's get beyond the set minds. Let's be fluid in our thinking. Let's hold opinions lightly. And here's another interesting phenomenon in the world today, and it's that of the binary debates, where there's no middle ground. You're either, I daren't use an example here because it's so contentious, but
go ahead.
The gender debate. Let's take that. You're either a left, and I'm not using these terms pejoratively. I'm just describing them as they are. You're either a left-wing liberal, perhaps an ideologue at one end. At the other end, you might be a little bit of a right-wing reactionary conservative, but you can't sit in the middle. And in fact, I wrote an article about this recently saying I'm not going to take sides. I just refuse to take sides. I'm not going to take a position on a debate which is so divisive and is doing the opposite of what humanity should be all about. It's tearing people apart and breaking them up and dividing them rather than bringing them together. Let's spend our time bringing people together rather than splitting them up through these entrenched opinions that people have. And in my circumstance, I do not, from a practical point of view, I do not need to take a stance on the gender debate. That might change, I don't know, and maybe there are other divisive debates where I do, but that one I don't have to. So why do it? And what I find is that I can actually see elements of both camps. I can see the truth in them. Can you hear me? Yeah.
How does that relate to the moving beyond the mindset? So what you're saying is that we've got to move beyond the binary thinking of this is right, this is wrong. I'm for men, I'm for women. Again, with the Israel, Palestine, with the Russia, Ukraine, with the China and this and China and America and all the rest of these things. There's a wonderful author named Shoshana Zuboff, and she wrote a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. It's a fantastic read about, this thing they say in the legal profession, which is cui bono, right? Who benefits, right?
Yep.
Who benefits from this? And if you look online and see how social media companies benefit from polarized views, it's lovely. And they keep on showing the same thing that sustains your views. So if you're pro-women, pro-feminism, you're going to get this kind of thing, and then they're going to show you the most polarized, most insightful, and the most emotionally grabbing content to keep you engaged. Interesting study done of all the emotions that we respond most to and we're most likely to engage with, and the emotion across all cultures all over the world is anger.
Yeah.
And that's your number one emotion to polarize and engage. So if I want to get you engaged and I need eyeballs. We're in the eyeballs economy right now. She talks about the attention economy, and it's brilliant. It's such a brilliant book because it all kind of fits in. Because when you're online and you're looking at this and you're like, come on, guys, like it's really not about men and women. It's not about this, it's not about that. And they go, what's wrong with man? What's wrong with humanity? You start losing faith in them. And then you realize when you read Shoshana Zuboff, you actually get a compassionate view towards these algorithms and the social media companies behind it. They got money to make. And the money they make is off the lives and the attention of human beings. So they need them polarized and they need them being angry. So nobody wants people happy because you're not going to watch CNN. You're not going to go online to your social media feeds. You're going to be reading a book on Shakespeare or learning, like I read recently Dostoevsky, again, reading Brothers Karamazov. And I mean,
yes,
heavenly stuff that you can read from there. And I did a quote on that as well. So Chris, we need to wind it up because we're running out of time. But what a fascinating discussion. We covered so many different topics and so many different bases. And I like the way we began on exploring, like what you say, the existential or the deeper realms of existence. And then we spoke a lot about rational thinking, and then we brought it all back to grounding. And so I think what leaders can get out of this, an audience in general, because everybody's a leader, mother's a leader, father's a leader, whatever it is you lead.
Totally. Yeah.
We'll be able to, and I'll summarize a bit and then you can add on as well, is that use your mind, but use other faculties within yourself, and also having this broader, wider, exploratory understanding of life in all its totality makes you more useful and more engaged, more practical, and ultimately more successful on multiple realms of disciplines rather than more money in the bank account.
Totally. And what came to mind as you were saying that is use your mind because you are not your mind. So use it. And what the human condition is such that it's actually our minds using us. And
other minds using our minds to achieve what their minds are doing. So the only way to get out of this is to never mind. I like the question. Never mind. So Chris, I will put some details on there for people to get in touch with you on LinkedIn. This will go into the YouTube channel, and your book. You're very humble about it, but it's got like 63 reviews, and did pretty damn good on the sales side. So well done to you for writing the book. Your Forbes articles as well, and I think the world needs more leadership coaches and mentors and whatever other terms to do with leadership like you, because I think it's really important. And yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation, and it was amazing how much we resonate with. I was recently on another podcast. Well, I'll remove that line because, of course, the people will be able to tell what I'm talking about. This, so I'll remove that particular thing. Um, but it was really lovely to meet with you, and I look forward to engaging with you more online and hopefully
Yeah.
in person too.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Rishad. I'm thank you so much for the invitation, and it's great to speak to people with a like mind.
Yeah,
Even though
this
we've
is
disparaged the mind a bit, but yeah, it's fantastic and very refreshing. And it's a pity we can't go on for another couple of hours.
Yeah, we could definitely, especially on the topic of mind, because if you take the Eastern traditions, the mind is not in the brain alone. So that's really
No,
interesting.
no,
Yeah,
indeed. Yeah,
explore as well. Thanks
fantastic.
again once more, Chris. Chat soon.
Okay, all the best. Bye.
Cheers. Bye. Hold on. I'm going to stop the recording and say goodbye.